Everything is built around the future documentary series to promote the Sussexes. But to that extent, there are a few people who were sympathetic to her, and obviously I spoke to her father, who loves her. She was good looking, she was good company, she could talk the way he wanted to talk about his subject.
Picture a chess game where every piece believes it's the queen, where strategy replaces spontaneity, where calculation consumes connection. This isn't about fairy tales or scandals. It's about something far more universal. The moment ambition transforms a person beyond recognition, when someone rewrites themselves so completely that even they forget who they started as.
Another royal death. The royal family announcing in the past few hours.
We're examining the most public identity crisis of our generation, not through tabloid headlines or palace gossip, but through the lens of behavioral psychology. What happens when someone constructs an identity so meticulously that it becomes a prison? When the performance never stops, when the mask fuses to the face.
Have been among the first to reveal lots of the strains in this marriage.
The human brain isn't designed for constant performance. Psychologists call it impression management fatigue. Every interaction becomes strategic, every gesture calculated, every word measured against potential backlash. The cognitive load becomes crushing. Relationships transform into transactions. Love morphs into leverage. And the person underneath, they vanish completely.
Prince Harry's rumored peace summit with King Charles.
This is the story of two people who believed they could architect their own narrative, who thought public perception could be engineered like a marketing campaign. They forgot the first rule of human psychology: authenticity can't be manufactured. It either exists or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the void it leaves consumes everything around it.
Is in shock as Angela Levin, the famed royal biographer, drops a bombshell that...
We're not here to judge. We're here to understand, to examine how modern media, ancient institutions, and human psychology collided in the most watched identity experiment of our time. Because what happened to these two individuals reveals something profound about our culture, about what we value, what we punish, and what happens when someone tries to have it all by being nothing real at all.
Has announced plans for a spin-off to the hit series Suits, which will be set in Los Angeles. It will focus on...
The transformation didn't happen overnight. Identity shifts never do. They begin with small compromises, minor adjustments, a slightly different accent here, a borrowed gesture there. Psychologists recognize this pattern. It's called selective self-presentation. We all do it. Meeting the parents, job interviews, first dates, but most of us return to baseline. We drop the act when we're home.
Great. Netflix, yes, the same Netflix that's bleeding subscribers and can't stop throwing money at dumpster.
But what if you never go home? What if every moment becomes a performance? What if the cameras never truly turn off? The psychological toll compounds. Studies show that sustained identity performance correlates with anxiety, depression, and relationship dysfunction. The brain exhausts itself maintaining the facade, and eventually, something breaks.
Is out here doing what the critics never expected, answering questions directly, on camera.
Consider the military veteran who spent years building genuine service credibility, earning respect through action, not words, creating bonds through shared sacrifice. Then watch that same person abandon every earned credential for scripted sound bites. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure. When someone abandons their authentic self for a predetermined role, the cost? Everything that made them real. The other player brought different psychology, years of navigating spaces where worth was transactional, where value meant proximity to power. This creates what researchers term contingent self-worth. Your value depends entirely on external validation, on being seen with the right people, wearing the right things, saying the right words. But contingent self-worth is unstable. It requires constant feeding, constant proof, constant performance. When these two psychological profiles merged, they created something unprecedented. Not a partnership, but a feedback loop, each reinforcing the other's need for external validation, each pushing further from authenticity, neither able to provide the stability the other desperately needed. The public watched, fascinated and horrified. We witnessed identity construction in real time. Every interview revealed new contradictions, stories that didn't align, timelines that shifted, body language that screamed discomfort while words proclaimed happiness. The disconnect was visceral. Humans are wired to detect incongruence. Our survival once depended on knowing who to trust, and every instinct screamed that something here wasn't real. Media psychologists have a term: parasocial relationships. We form one-sided emotional connections with public figures. We feel we know them. But what happens when those figures constantly reshape themselves? When their story changes with each telling, the parasocial bond breaks, trust evaporates, and fascination turns to suspicion. The institutional response was predictable. Large systems resist change. They especially resist change that threatens their foundation. Psychologists call it system justification. Even those harmed by a system often defend it, because the alternative, acknowledging the system's flaws, feels too destabilizing. So the institution did what institutions do. It protected itself. It closed ranks. It waited. Meanwhile, the psychological pressure mounted. Every public appearance required more energy, more preparation, more careful scripting. The spontaneity that once defined one of them vanished, replaced by rehearsed statements, practiced gestures. The very qualities that made him relatable, the unguarded moments, the genuine laughter, the ability to connect, disappeared. Identity performance had consumed the person underneath. The other player faced different pressures. Having crafted an identity around struggle and triumph, any crack in that narrative threatened everything. So the performance intensified. The victim narrative expanded. The grievances multiplied. But psychology tells us something crucial. When we define ourselves by our wounds, we can never heal. We need those wounds to stay fresh, to justify our choices, to maintain our constructed identity. This psychological prison affected everyone in their orbit. Family members became props or obstacles. Friends became useful or disposable. Children became extensions of the brand. Every relationship filtered through the lens of strategic value. Genuine connection became impossible because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the performance. The business failures weren't surprising to behavioral economists. When identity is performance, every project becomes about maintaining the facade rather than creating value. Content becomes secondary to image. Substance loses to style. And audiences, who ultimately want authentic connection, drift away. The projects failed not because of conspiracy or sabotage, but because they were hollow from inception. Hollywood understands this psychology intimately. It's an industry built on manufactured identity, but it also recognizes the difference between playing a role and becoming one. Actors know when to drop character. They maintain a private self separate from their public persona. But what we witnessed was method acting without a method, performance without pause, character without core. The psychological term is identity diffusion, when someone loses track of where the performance ends and the person begins, when every mirror reflects a different version, when even private moments feel staged, the exhaustion becomes total, the isolation complete, because maintaining multiple identities requires constant vigilance. And humans aren't designed for constant vigilance. We break. What makes this psychology particularly tragic is its preventability. Had either person maintained connection to their authentic self through old friendships, consistent values, genuine interests, the spiral might have stopped. But identity performance demands total commitment. Old friends remind you who you were. Consistent values limit your flexibility. Genuine interests reveal actual preferences. All threats to the constructed narrative. The children represent the ultimate psychological complexity, born into performance. Their earliest memories will include cameras and calculation. Developmental psychology warns about the impact. Children need consistent identity models. They need to see adults as being genuine, being flawed, being real. Instead, they witness constant performance, every moment curated, every interaction strategic. The long-term effects won't be known for years, but the research isn't optimistic. Social media amplified every psychological pressure, the need for constant content, the immediate feedback, the global audience. It created what researchers call context collapse, the inability to adjust behavior for different audiences because all audiences are watching simultaneously. The psychological strain is immense. It's why so many digital natives report anxiety and identity confusion. Now imagine that pressure combined with royal protocols, family dynamics, and global scrutiny. The breakdown was inevitable, not because of external forces or internal conspiracies, but because of basic psychology. Humans cannot sustain permanent performance. We cannot maintain multiple simultaneous identities indefinitely. We cannot build genuine relationships on strategic foundations. Eventually, the cognitive load becomes unbearable. The contradictions become obvious. The performance becomes transparent. What we witnessed wasn't unique in its psychology, only in its visibility. Countless people construct false identities, create strategic relationships, perform rather than live, but most do so in relative privacy. Their collapse affects only their immediate circle. This collapse played out on a global stage. Every contradiction documented, every strategic move analyzed, every performance reviewed. The lesson isn't about them, it's about us, about a culture that rewards performance over authenticity, that values image over substance, that encourages strategic relationships over genuine connection. We created the conditions for this psychological experiment. We rewarded the performance until we didn't. We demanded authenticity while consuming artifice. The mirror this story holds up isn't flattering. It reveals our complicity in demanding impossible standards, our hunger for drama, our willingness to watch identity destruction as entertainment. We're not innocent observers. We're active participants in a system that rewards psychological manipulation until it doesn't, that celebrates strategic relationships until they're exposed, that demands performance while claiming to value authenticity. Recovery requires something neither seems capable of: genuine vulnerability, admitting the performance, acknowledging the manipulation, accepting responsibility without strategic benefit. But vulnerability threatens everything they've built. It would require dismantling the constructed identity and revealing whatever remains underneath. If anything remains, the tragedy isn't the lost titles or failed deals, it's the lost selves. Two people who might have been genuinely remarkable chose instead to be strategically successful. And in choosing strategy over authenticity, they lost both. Because strategic success requires constant maintenance, constant performance, constant validation. It's exhausting, it's isolating, and ultimately it's unsustainable. What remains is a cautionary tale about the price of performed identity, about relationships built on calculation rather than connection, about the exhaustion of permanent performance, not because they're unique, but because they're not, because their psychology is our psychology. Their pressures, amplified versions of our pressures. Their failures, public versions of private struggles we all face. The question isn't whether they can recover, it's whether we can learn, whether we can recognize the psychological patterns in our own lives, the small performances that become permanent, the strategic relationships that replace genuine ones, the constructed identities that consume our authentic selves. Because if we can't learn from the most public identity collapse of our generation, we're doomed to repeat it. Maybe not on a global stage, but in our own quiet desperations, our own performed lives, our own strategic emptiness. The real tragedy isn't their fall. It's that in a culture obsessed with authentic living, we've made authenticity impossible. We demand genuine connection while rewarding strategic networking. We claim to value vulnerability while punishing anyone who displays it. We've created a psychological paradox that traps not just public figures, but all of us. And until we resolve that paradox, we'll keep watching these stories unfold. Different players, same psychology, same inevitable collapse.